Everyone, especially to our teacher Janina Sinswat. I am Jonalyn Abdullah Aban from Bachelor of Secondary Education, major in Mathematics.
And I am Siti Ayesha Omar Gepal from Bachelor of Physical Education.
And we are the presenter for the topic Spiritual Self. This lesson has 6 learning outcomes, and these are the following learning outcomes. At the end of this chapter, you should be able to
demonstrate an understanding of the spiritual self,
explain the importance of the spirituality in all's life,
discuss how spirituality is connected to religion,
describe how spirituality develops, and
analyze how spirituality and animism are associated.
the spiritual self, understanding the self, handout. Chapter 10, the spiritual self, the belief in supernatural being and power. What is a supernatural being? It is a being that is better and more powerful than any creature in the natural world. An incorporeal being believed to have powers to affect the course of human events is also commonly conceived of as being better, higher, or purer than the mundane natural world around us. Examples of supernatural being: gods, ghosts, angels, demons, dwarf, fairy, goblin. Worship of the supernatural. One of the attributes of the God in tradition, theism, is a being that is worthy of worship. Worship may take form of ritual sacrifices, prayer, consultation, obedience to commands from supernatural being. Common questions regarding supernatural being.
Does God exist? A common question which atheists hear a lot is, why don't you believe in God? These religious or not have trouble imagining why anyone would not believe in at least some sort of God. Preferably their own. Must gods be supernatural? The concept of God is usually associated with the supernatural today, but that is not always the case. Greek gods, for example, are not supernatural in the way we usually think of.
Greek mythology doesn't describe their gods as creating nature. They have great power and great roles to play, but they do not exist outside the nature or even outside of certain natural constraints. They are more powerful than mortal human beings, but they aren't better than mortals or transcendent to nature itself. Does God matter? The concept of God is usually associated with the supernatural today, but that isn't always the case. Greek gods, for example, are not supernatural in the way we usually think of. Greek mythology doesn't describe their gods as creating nature. They have great power and great roles to play, but they do not exist outside of nature or even outside a certain natural constraint.
They are more powerful than mortal human beings, but they aren't better than mortals or transcendent to nature itself. What is animism? The term animism derives from the Latin word anima, meaning breath or soul. Animism is the belief that everything in nature, including living things like trees, plants, and even non-living rocks or streams, has its own spirit or divinity.
Animistic belief may have been overtaken by various sorts of theism in world religions, but they never entirely disappear. Religion is a belief in supernatural being retrieved from beliefs in supernatural. The concept of dungan, spirit or soul, the term animism is one of the oldest beliefs, which is taken from the Latin word anima, meaning breath or soul. Animism is the belief that everything in nature Living things like trees, plants, and even non living rocks or streams have their own spirit or divinity. Animism beliefs are still present, accepted, and never entirely disappear.
The soul or spirit in different region of the Philippines, one kaluluwa by the Tagalog, two gimukod by the Bagobos, and three is makatu by the Bukidnon, and four is dungan by the Ilonggos when is alive, kalag or detached free when he is dead, and number five is Ikararawa by the Ibanags. Six is Kadkadua by the Ilocanos when the soul is in the physical body and it is seen as a constant companion. Karuruwa when it departs the soul according to the indigenous Filipino is known as Kaluluwa or Ikaruruwa or Karuruwa.
It is taken from the root word dua, which means two. The soul has two parts. One is the physical part, where it is connected to the body and itself, and the other spiritual, where it exists on its own. For the Ibanags, the soul is the principle of life in man. The body is the matter. The soul is the form. As long as the body and soul are one unit, man is alive. Death is the separation of the soul from the body. The body cannot stay alive without the body. Freed from the body, it ceases to experience thirst and hunger, cold and heat.
As spirit, the soul is the opposite of the body, which is matter for the Ilonggos. They call the soul dungan, which cannot be seen by the human eye. Sometimes the dungan may show itself in the form of insect, a housefly or a moth, or small animals like lizard. According to Visayans, the dungan may leave the body voluntarily while the person is asleep. Among the unsighted Filipino, when the person is asleep, he or she should not be awakened quickly in order to give ample time for the dungan to return to the body.
When the dungan is traveling outside of the body, it should be free from accidents because there is possibility that it might be trapped in a jar or be poured out with the liquid from a vessel. When the soul has safely returned home to the body of its owner, she could then be awakened. It is believed that whatever happens to the dungan happens to the physical body as well. It is also believed that another reason for the voluntary withdrawal of the soul is maltreated.
The Visayans believe that the soul or dungan is not located in any specific part of the body. Rather, it is believed to grow proportionally with the person's body. It is normally weak at birth. That is why babies are said to be susceptible to using
unintentional transfer of disturbing vapors of a strong body to a weak by holding.
Voguing or just looking at the weaker one. It is for this reason that the dungan needs protection and nurture. Soul nature, the folks believe, means the performance of age-old spirituals, many of which are still followed in the local provinces today.
Examples of these are birth, illness, and death rituals consisting of trances, prayer, and animal sacrifices. An adult person with a healthy dungan properly lodged in his physical body will have bodily health and well-being, intelligence, and good sense. The Visayan has a secondary meaning of willpower. A strong dungan is the intellectual and psychological capacity to dominate or persuade others to one's way of thinking.
A person with a lot of willpower is said to have a strong dungan constant. Companionship, wait lang. Companionship, sometimes under the same roof, of two people may lead to a spiritual competition between the two dungans and the defeat, causing illness to the one with the weaker dungan. At that, the dungan leaves the body through the nose, eyes, ears, and other body orifices and eventually goes with the air or the wind towards the upper region.
There it waits until it can find another body to enter. Lastly, there will be analysis on the comparison between the belief of religion versus folklore. What is the soul? The soul Hebrew term for soul is nepis. It is found more than 780 times in the Old Testament because of the variety of contextual meanings. It is not always rendered by the English word soul. The King James Version uses 28 different words by which to translate the original terms nepis. Therefore, signifies different things depending on the passage in which it occurs.
Similarly, in the Greek New Testament, the original word of the soul is such. It is found 103 times our modern word. Psychology derives from this Greek term. These are the some uses of the word soul in the scriptures. A soul is person sometimes. The word soul signifies merely. Sometimes the word soul signifies merely an individual person. The prophet Ezekiel declared that the soul whose sins will surely die. Peter would write centuries later that 8 souls were saved by water in the days of Noah. See also Exodus. A soul is life itself. In some context, a soul simply has reference to a biological life. It is the animating force that is common to both human and animals. All creatures have life. The weak king Herod that great sought to take the life of baby Jesus. In one of the visions of the Apocalypse, certain creatures of the sea were said to possess souls or life. A soul can refer to the mind. A soul can have to do with that aspect of mind that is characterized by the intellectual and emotional. It is the internal component of man that is fashioned in the very image of God. It can exist apart from the physical body.
Rituals and ceremonies. Rituals free for any person of any age, gender, religion, non-religion, or culture to practice habitual state of action that are imbued with deep and personally significant meanings doesn't have to be esoteric or religious type of rituals. Prescriptive, a ritual that a deity or religious authority requires to be performed situational, a ritual that arises as needed frequently in time of crisis. Calendrical, a ritual that is performed on a regular basis as part of religious calendar. Occasional, a ritual that is performed when particular need arises. Common ritual practice in the Philippines: circumcision festival, penitentia, benefits of rituals in the spiritual self. Rituals afford us a sense of belonging. Rituals provide us with a sense of renewal. They provide an ongoing way to structure our lives. They give us a way to connect to family, past, and parents. Present. Rituals help us access our authentic selves through their ability to carry us into deeper levels of consciousness. Rituals provide the essential tools for creating our own lives. Rituals give meaning to our journey and a sense of purpose to our lives. Ceremonies, a set of acts, often traditional or religious, performed at a formal occasion to recognize an important event, Common example of ceremonies, wedding, birthdays, graduation rites, importance of ceremonies. They may reflect our beliefs, hopes, tradition, culture, and spirituality, but they also express who we are. They are held to celebrate a new life or in honor of a life well lived. They are held to reflect on events, even of a historical and social significance. They help to heal for those events that cause devastation or loss.
Religion, spirituality, and identity religion. According to Sontrak, an organized set of beliefs, practices, rituals, and symbols that increases an individual's connection to a sacred or transcendent other. Belief in a god or other gods. Organized system of beliefs, ceremonies, and rules used to worship a god, an interest, a belief, or an activity deemed to of utmost importance to a person or a group, according to William James. Feeling, act, and experience of individual men in their solitude, so far as they affirm themselves to stand in a relation to whatever they may consider divine.
Religiousness. According to Sontrak, a degree by which one is affiliated with an organized religion in terms of the person participation, the prescribed rituals and practices, connection with its belief, and involvement with its community of believers.
Spirituality involves experiencing something beyond oneself in the transcendent manner and living in a way that benefits others and society. Search for the sacred may significant a person, an object, as principle, or a concept that transcends the self. Can include a divine being or a divine object that is set apart and considered holy or beyond the ordinary.
Spiritual identity, persistent sense of self that addresses ultimate questions about the nature, purpose, and meaning of life, result in behavior that are consonant with the individual's course, value, focuses on the individual construction of a relationship to sacred and ultimate meaning, emerge as the symbolic, religious, and spiritual content of a culture that is appropriate by individual in the context of their own lives. A high level of spirituality leads to a high level or self-efficacy. A structural equation modeling on the factors affecting on tolerance of uncertain and worry among a select group of Filipino elderly, Guzman and Laracas.
Magic and Witchcraft Book. Magic power of apparently influencing the course of events by using mysterious or supernatural forces. It is the ability to use supernatural forces to make impossible things happen. Magician, one who performed magic, derived the old French magician, which is rooted in the Greek word magicus or mogus, meaning magical. Sorcerer, translated from the Greek word pharmakos, and carries with it the idea of medicine, magic, potion, drugs, and poison. Wizard, one who is acquainted with the secret of the non-material or unseen world. Necromancer, one who is seeking unto the dead.
Barang, Filipino term for a sorcerer. It is used to describe malignant, sorcery, or familiar spirit. Kulang, Tagalog word for voodoo or witchcraft. Alburak, albulario, mananambal, Filipino practitioner of traditional medicine. Folklores include aswang, manananggal, kapre, duwende, sirena, syokoy, engkanto, sigpin, tikbalang, tiyanak, and many others. Witchcraft practice in the Philippines. Have you ever heard of Gayuma or heard stories about the people suffering from kulam? Do you know by chance some people who perform the kulam? Or do you ever experience getting treated by albularyos rather than doctors? If your answer were all yes, then Philippine culture and tradition were presented to you. Back in the old times, due to lack of hospitals and other equipments used in performing a surgery or treatment, elders would consult a faith healers. One of the most famous faith healers are the albularyos. Albularyos were believed to have a gimat or anting-anting, charms like pendant with words inscribed mostly Latin. It is believed that it is where they get their power to heal people. Others would also say that albularyos is the instrument or the channel of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, or some other powers, guides. But, however, faith healing is beyond religion and was also influenced by other religions such as the Buddhism, Muslim, Protestantism, and etc.
Albularyos chant incantation mostly in Pig Latin while healing someone by just chanting incantation and performing rituals. Albularyos were able to know the illness of one person. Na-engkanto ed nausog were some of the common diagnoses of albularyos. They also performed some rituals that would alleviate the said illness and be healed soon. But some of the faith healers performed surgery as their way of treating, and it is called bare hand surgery, where the surgery was conducted without the use of any medical equipment. Just the bare hands of the faith healers. Lawrence Cockton is the famous faith healer who performed the bare hand surgery. This may be quite risky surgery to some, but for those who believe, this is very powerful and effective remedy for them. Albularyos were also believed to be able to counterfeit a kulam. Many Filipinos, even in present day, believe on the kulam, wherein it is the use of black magic to perform some evil deeds that could cause to hurt other people. Other Filipinos would intimate that mangkukulam, the one who perform the kulam, are often from the island of Siquijor and Samar and the province of Sorsogon. The foremost image of mangkukulam in the public involves the use of rag doll to injure the intended victim. For the course to work, something belonging from the victim should be obtained by the mangkukulam and closer to the intended victim, the more the course will be effective. So, strand of hair, spit of drops of blood are highly recommended for the maximum effect. Believers said that there are only two ways for the curse to be lifted. First, removing the string tied from the rag doll, and the second one is killing the witch herself. Kulam exists in the wider context. It does not just revolve stinking needles on it. Other Filipinos referred mangkukulam as the village witch, where they can get blood spells to catch cheating husband, poison and such. The common love spell here in the Philippines is the gayuma. For this gayuma to work, you need to pour some of it on your victim's drinks, and it is needed to be drunk by the victim.
Both mangkukulam and albularyos use magic or perform some rituals and incantation. However, they should be remembered that these two were different from each other. Albularyos are specialized in healing people. Sometimes they use herb as the medicines of the patient, while mangkukulam is more of specializing in tricks, curses, and hexes. And sometimes albularios were the one who healed those people who've been suffering from kulam. They often prescribed to their patient who's nakulam to find the caster of the kulam and bribe them to lift the curse out to them. The other form of remedies that albulario perform is the use of buntot pagi, string gay's tail. The albularios whip the person who's been cursed by the buntot pagi until the afflicted was forced to say the name of the witch or mangkukulam who casted the curse. They also believed that through whipping they were able to punish or cause pain the person who casted the spell or mangkukulam. And in that way, the albulario can convince the mangkukulam to lift the spell they cast. Witchcraft has been part of Filipino culture since before the Spaniard came. However, as the time goes by and as the world become modern, where technologies and other advanced machineries were introduced to the Filipinos, these were slowly fading and only few still believes on it. Most of the time, Filipino people consult to the real doctors regarding to their health, disregarding the old way of healing. We may have been more advanced today, but still we should not forget what our ancestors and our grandparents believed on their time because these were where we started and this is still part of our culture. Our culture wouldn't be complete as it is now without this kind of belief. We may not patronize this, but we should not forget this thing.
Witchcraft in the Philippines, Filipino, witches, midwives, and healers. The most prominent types of Filipino witches, I put witches in parentheses because each individual believes on what is considered or not considered, which will vary. For our intents and purposes, Filipino witches means anyone who practices magic. Katolanan, Tagalog, Priestess. The Katolana, Katulanin, Kampampangan is a priest or a priestess in the indigenous religion of the Tagalog, mostly found in central to southern Luzon. They are the equivalent of the Visayas, Baybayin, Spanish priests, and missionaries. Also call them Anitero male or Anitera female. What the Catalonan? Do they safeguard the religious practices of the barangay, a type of community, and the dambana, the main term for a sacred place before Catholicism was introduced in the Philippines. Now, in the modern times, it may refer to shrines of indigenous religion in the Philippines, altar of the Philippines, churches, or monumento erected to the remember Philippines history.
Female entrance the Catolana, offering and ceremonies, the Catalona could be of either sex or male transvestites. Vayogin, but were usually women from prominent wealthy families. As compensation for their services, they received part of the offering, mostly food, wine, clothing, and gold. Thus, the Catalonans filed a very prestigious as well as lucrative role in society. The Catalanas perform public ceremonies for community, prosperity, fertility, or seasonable weather, as well as private services to diagnose and cure ailments. This type of Filipino witches were respected for these functions, but they were also feared sorcerers able to work black magic. Some were spirit medium and held sense during which they spoke with the voice of Spirit Anito.
The Babaylan shamans and mediums, the Babaylands were shamans of various ethnic groups of the pre-colonial Philippines and usually found in Visayas. They were highly respected members of the community, though they were usually female, especially the mediums. They function as spirit, medium, and as a mananambal, a Filipino practitioner of traditional medicines or a medicine man.
The Babaylan's abilities and the Babaylands could be considered Filipino, which is in that they perform divination, sorcery, black magic, and herbalism. There were male shamans too, but they're usually the minority and belong to a special class of shamans known as Asog. Feminized men in Luzon, they be called Bayok. The Asog would adapt the boys' mannerism, hairstyle, and overall look of a female. They were treated as women by the community and would do the work most women did back then: shamanism, pottery, and weaving. These powerful individuals were believed to possess powers that block dark magic and heal the sick of wounded. They ensure safe pregnancies and childbirths.
Albulario Filipino Witch Doctor. The Albulario is a Filipino witch doctor, folk healer, or medicine man who often don't have formal education. They are equivalent to a general practitioner and knowledgeable in most folkloric medicinal herbs. The Filipino witch doctor was believed to have acquired their healing abilities from an elder passed down to them, or acquired from a supernatural being or a higher power. Some are able to find out your ailments just by checking your pulse.
Herbalists and healers coined by the Spaniard as herbolario or in English an herbalist. An albulario is alternatively called a manghihilot, a person who does healing massage, or a manggagamot, someone who heals. They are found in rural areas where modern medicine and facilities are expensive and difficult to find. People who are traditional and superstitious are the one who seek the albulario the most. Aside from the tradition, people seek them because they are believed to show more care and concern for their patients as compared to the modern doctor.
Albularios differ by region and were born from the suppression of the Baybaylans and native Filipino animists. Their practice is influenced by animism and the local mythological ethos. To survive persecution, some willingly adopted the Catholic ways by diffusing together ancient healing practices with the new religion and exchanged their native pagan prayers with oricons. Albularios were prominent figures in rural Philippines.
Albularios and angry spirits, people trust the albulario to rid of them of disease of natural or supernatural causes. They employ herbs, alum, coconut oil in their healing practices as well as incorporating prayers, chants, and supernatural cures. These cures are used especially for cases involving spirits like the duendes, dwarf or goblin, nuno, sapunso, a dwarf-like creature. Some call them ancestor, grandparents, or the unhealed, but not because they are actually ancestor, but they are perceived to be old-looking earthbound dwarfs that live on ant hills, lumang lupa, chinon tikbalang, hybrid horse beast, complete anatomical opposite of a centaur, and a capre, a tree giant or a tree demon that carries a cigar, has a prominent smell that hard to ignore.
A dying breed as Western medicine rose, people learned towards modern technology and scientific treatments, slowly pushing the Albolarios and Filipino witch doctor into shadow even further, slowly being driven to extinction. However, they can still be found in the rural areas of the Philippines.
Faith healers, Filipino faith healers usually start as an albularyo, a medico or a manghihilot. They believe their healing powers come from a higher being like the Holy Spirit. They believe this higher gives them to the gift of healing, or they believe they are merely a medium of the Holy Spirit or the Mother Mary to heal. These faith healers use their divine connection to heal others. Their mode of healing is prayers, visiting religious or sacred sites, or by use of sheer faith. But they truly believe calling on the presence of a higher power will heal those who ask them. Their hands are used as their healing tools. People who seek their healing liken their result to miracles of God, Mother Mary, on one end of the spectrum. There are albularyo's, manghihilot, and other faith healers where healing rituals are mostly religious icons, prayers, and innovation. They use the same divining ways of a mangtatawas diagnosing black elves, black genomes, black dwarfs, and the like evil spirit possession and sorcery as causes of maladies with their knowledge, belief, and courage. They share their unconventional concoction of treatment to heal.
Psychic healers, on the other end of the fringe, there are psychic healers, those who can heal at a distance, whispering and blowing prayers to the afflicted areas. Healers anointing to the bodies with flowers dipped in coconut oil, infused with prayers. Healers anointing the affected areas with their own saliva, and healers who pass religious icons or crucifixes over the body, kind of like the same way you use salt or an egg to check for the evil eyes. To this group of healers belong the psychic surgeons, those who perform bare-handed surgery. They perform without the traditional surgical tools. They are but a small number, perhaps over 100, and a more handful of them are exceptional by faith healer standards.
Mankukulam. The feared one's kulam is a form of a Filipino folk magic, especially natural magic, where the practice is very similar to voodoo. A mangkukulam is someone who is believed to be a sorcerer who performs black magic. They can either be a man or a woman. People come to these Filipino witches for revenge or justice. That's why they are the most well-known and the most fierce type of witch in the Philippines, especially in rural areas. If you ask even a city dweller, they know all too well what a mangkukulam is and are just as fearful as the country dweller. Aside from the mangkukulam's ability to harm, hex, or curse people, they also offer love potion. And for witches like me, love potions are no as its control another free will.
Mangtatawas diagnosis ritual. A mangtatawas is a divination where someone uses tawas or alum as a diagnostic ritual. Other tools could be used for a diagnostic ritual, like candles, eggs, plain paper, or the paper used in cigarettes, and mirrors. A good example of candle wax diagnosis is interpreting the shapes that form in bowl of water from candle wax drippings. This has personally been done to me when I was a child because I was sickly.
Manghihilot. Healing hands. A manghihilot is someone who performs hilot, a magical chiropractic type of massage or form of Reiki healing. Their scope of healing abilities are limited and are reserved only for sprain, sala, afflicted area, or cause of pain. And massage in general, the basis is more esoteric than scientific. They use hilo to find musculoligamentous disorder and musculoskeletal problems to diagnose and treat Even though they have no formal training, people from rural areas seek them. The Mangihilot also use coconut oil or special herb as patch to an afflicted area.
Magpapaanak. The magpapaanak is someone who people call for pregnancy, prenatal and postnatal issues. They have a basic knowledge of herbal medicinal plants which they use in prenatal and postnatal care like suob. They mostly get their training from a trained practitioner who was a relative, friend, or neighbor's son. Become magpapaanak because of a spiritual calling or a message from a supernatural being that grants them the needed power. Their care starts about the fifth month of pregnancy. The magpapaanak requires the patients to follow up every 2 weeks or as often as needed to assess the progress and fetal position.
Education, and when there is no magpapaanak, midwives are required to be certified and should be registered annually at the municipal hall. Yet there is no strict enforcement of certification for a magpapaanak in improvised communist deliveries are performed by friends, neighbors, or relatives who have gained experience, confidence, and the basic expertise in umbilical cord care if a magpapaanak is not available. Pagbubuhos pre-baptism. In the same communities or even in developed ones where superstitions are treated seriously, if an infant shows unusual amount of crying or restlessness, they attribute it to unpleasant insights. A midwife or local healer might take on the task of pagbubuhos, a pre-baptismal ritual of water application or immersion performed on some infant while awaiting the sacramental church ritual. When I asked my old nanny, I had nanny who was originally a midwife. She was from Siquijor, one of the most feared islands in the Philippines, known for its legend, superstitions, and the
That puts it extremely well. Number two, these means of tapping into supernatural power were very widely known. You could say they were part of the lore which was acquired by every child as part of their education for life, like learning to cross the road as it were. But the world of magic also had its specialists, and they were those who were known as the cunning folk, cunning men, or wise women. These individuals were those who were known to have special knowledge over the above the average knowledge of magical practices and who often believed to have a special inherent power. Often inherent, it was the thought to pass in the blood. The cunning folk, who were pretty numerous, one survey of known cunning folk in East Anglia, this suggests that was known cunning man or wise woman within 10 miles of any village. These people were appealed for the variety of specific purposes. In the first place, they often were appealed for medical reason. Very often they had specialist knowledge of her which they would administer, often accompanied by spell. To increase their effectiveness, the psychological effect of the incantation going along with what may well have been the practical effect of the herbs they used. Ursula Kemp, for example, was such a person. She was known as a healer in her village. She was good at curing arthritis. Apparently, again, they were appealed to for the diagnosis of witchcraft. If a person suspect that they might have been bewitched, they might go to the cunning folk for the provision of counter magic. They might help the victim to identify who might attack them in this occult manner and advise on counteraction. One of my favorite cunning men came from a town in the north of England, Stokesley, and he was called John Wrightson, and he was known as Old Wrightson, the wise man of Stokesley, and people went to him for help with their horses. He was a horse leech. He was very good at telling whether your horse had been bewitched and knowing how to take the appropriate countermeasures.
People went to the canning folk, also the recovery of lost or stolen goods, and they went for advice and the telling of fortunes, and to this extent the wise women and the cunning men were the popular equivalent of the astrologers who had a more elite clientele in this period. So the cunning folk provided a variety of real services, and the best of them may well have been quiet skilled therapists. In their way, one historian of medical practice in this period says we ought to count them amongst the medical practitioners of the time. They were cheap, they were available, and in many ways quite knowledgeable. However, the church was very pretty unhappy about this kind of activity. It didn't like the popular magic. The official teaching of the church was the person suffered any misfortune, it must have been the result of divine providence.
It was either a test of your faith or, on the other hand, it was a judgment on your sin. The only proper response to a misfortune was to search one's own heart for the possible causes of such divine intervention, to pray, to repent, to trust in God's providential purposes. The church rejected magical means of a relief. It accepted the possibility, but it rejected the means. God could not be commanded by spells in incantation. Therefore, if there was any supernatural a response to such practices, it must be from evil spirits. And so, given these beliefs, we find the deeply pious of the period searching their hearts for the sins which had brought misfortune upon them, and sometimes finding quite extraordinary answer. You find it their diaries, for example. For example, the diary of the Reverend Ralph Jocelyn, a minister in the late.
And the great witch hunts which would be found scattered across Europe died back only when the judge came to doubt the reality of the stereotype of the witch, and came to the doubt the nation that witchcraft was an organized cult threatening to Christian society. One of the first legal jurisdictions to make that decision that the whole thing was just a terrible error was in fact the Spanish Inquisition.
One does not usually associate the Spanish Inquisition with progressive movements, but in 1610 they were the first to abandon, to refuse to deal with cases of this kind. The French Parliament again did so in 1640, some years later, so it gradually died away. But throughout both Catholic and Protestant Europe for some time, there was a unity in the war against witches as enemies of God. Well, how far was that pattern true of England? The usual answer is that it was not true of England, and that was for several reasons. First of all, the authorities in England never actually embraced the full ecclesiastical stereotype of witchcraft as evidence of membership of a diabolical 17th century, who, having lost a dearly loved daughter, searched his heart as to why God should have done this, why he should have taken her away, and came to the conclusion that it was because he had neglected his clerical duties, because of his enthusiasm for playing chess. He had played chess too much. God had taken his daughter. That the conclusion he came to, and he gave up playing chess. This is a 17th century God, not a nice modern user-friendly God. Little wonder then if this were the official teaching of the church, that the greater part of the population prefer to explain their misfortune in terms of just bad luck, of their neglect of protective magic, or perhaps the malevolence of evil spirit and malicious neighbors. Well, this world of popular magic had long existed and it was long endured. You can find much of still alive and well deep into the 19th century. And it endured because in various ways it helped. Chapter 2: Differences between witchcraft in England and in Europe. But the problem of witchcraft is altogether more distinctive that involve a specific kind of magic. The caution of injury or death by the malevolent and molecules use of supernatural power against another order property and that was the practice which was known as maleficium. That's the Latin legal term which was used for this maleficent magic. And concern with witchcraft in this way had a quite distinct chronology. The possibility of malevolent magic had always been there, of course, but concern it was undoubtedly at an unusual height in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. And the key to why that was so is perhaps to be found in what the historian of the Spanish Inquisition, Henry Cameron, has described as a peculiarly horrible conjunction in European history. A conjunction, he says, between popular superstition on the one hand and ecclesiastical fantasy on the other. The fantasies of a churchman, the popular superstitious element does not need any further elaboration, of course.
It had always been the case that some individuals were regarded as having this special access to occult power. The element of ecclesiastical fantasy, however, that was something that was peculiar to Western Christendom. We don't find it in the Orthodox tradition, and it was peculiar to the early modern period, emerging at the end of the 15th century and growing in strength in the 16th century. Essentially, it involves the belief that all witchcraft in fact involve worship of the devil, and as a result, the elaboration of a stereotype of the witch, which portrayed witches not merely as dabblers in magic or perpetrators of malefice against neighbors, but as something much more serious, members of an organization, diabolical and malevolent cult. Not just village, wise women or cunning men, but enemies of God throughout continental Europe and indeed Scotland. And result of this belief was that the main driving force behind the spasmodic witch hunt, which can be found in period and was probably the religious and logotherapy and finding the meaning of life. Before we dive into the discussion, let us first define some terms which may help us in understanding the topic better. Number one, psychotherapy. According to the American Psychiatric Association, psychotherapy or talk therapy is a way to help people with a broad variety of mental illness and emotional difficulties. Psychotherapy can help eliminate or control troubling symptoms so a person can function better and increase well-being and healing. Example of psychotherapeutic method is Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis, in which he promotes the will of pleasure. Thus, this topic focuses on a method technique in psychotherapy, which is logotherapy. Now, we are ready to define it. Number two, logotherapy. From the Greek word logos, which stands for meaning, is a type of psychotherapy that believes that lack of meaning causes mental health issues. So it attempts to help people find meaning in order to help solve their problems.
It is referred to as the Third Viennese School of Psychotherapy, which was promoted by Viktor Frankl. The relationship of spiritual self and logotherapy is Frank clarifies that this search for meaning does not have any relation to spiritual or religion, but strictly relates to finding purpose in one's life or task. However, one's belief or the belief of his or her family about spiritual may help in finding a path to the meaning in life. So religion can be one of the things to consider in thinking about one's own existence.
Logotherapies, what they do and what they don't. Logotherapies do not prescribe meaning to a patient, but rather describe the process of how meaning is obtained in hopes of providing the patients with a sense of fulfillment. Thorne and Henley 2005, thus logotherapy regards its assignment as that of assisting a patient to finding meaning in life. Frankl in 1959. The three basic principles of discovering meaning in life. Number one, life has meaning in all circumstances, even despondent ones. Number two, the main motivational force is the desire to find meaning in life. Number three, humanity has the freedom of additional attitudinal choice even in situation of unchangeable affliction. The essential identity of every human being is irrational and immortal soul, which is entirely out of the order of the physical creation. Baha'u'llah uses the metaphor of the sun to explain the relationship between the soul and the body. The soul of man is the sun by which his body is illumined and from which it draweth its sustenance, and should be so regarded.
It is through the exercise of the powers of the soul that human progress is achieved. Abdul Baha has said that the soul can discover the realities of things, comprehend the peculiarities of being, and penetrate the mysteries of existence. All sciences, knowledge, art, wonders, institutions, discoveries, and enterprises come from the exercise intelligence of the rational souls.
We are able to reflect divine attributes to the extent that we cleanse the mirror of our hearts and minds. Through prayer, the study and application of the sacred scriptures, the acquisition of knowledge, efforts to improve our conduct, and to overcome tests and difficulties, and service to humanity. When death occurs in this world, the soul is separated from the body and continues to progress in an eternal journey towards perfection.
When a soul has in it the life of the Spirit, then does it bring forth good fruit and become a divine tree. What is spiritual self? It's the bridge between the soul self, or our God, essence, and our physical and mental bodies. These energies coalesce into what we feel as our experience as had through our soul consciousness that comes through felt as various emotion and sensation of bliss, terror, compassion, or excitation.
This feeling is spirit, be it school spirit, team spirit, or the ultimate Holy Spirit. We experience it as the conglomeration of our beingness, which, if we know truth, can consciously create happiness and contentment within. The LNL. Your spiritual self is you in your most beautiful and powerful form. It is the authentic self, the unconditioned part, the you without patterns. Throughout the world, in all the great spiritual tradition, there is a teaching about divinity being within us, activities that nurtures your spirit and allows you to think bigger than yourself. Spiritual self-care does not have to be religious, although for some it is. Example, meditation, yoga, going to a place of worship, to be in nature, dedicate time for self-reflection.
Importance of spiritual self. Spiritual self is the link to many important aspects of human functioning. Spiritual people have positive relationships. High self-esteem are optimistic and have meaning and purpose in life. Spiritual self, as spiritual people self-actualize.
This will be the end of our discussion about the chapter 11 spiritual self. I hope you understand and you gain knowledge from our video presentation. Thank you.
And once again, I am Siti Ayesha Ugyapan,
And I am Jonaline Abdul Datuaban. And
your representative for the spiritual self.
chapter 11. Thank you so much.